So I've had a background in the Dead Sea Scrolls that goes quite a ways. Way back when I was a child, my parents were friends with Dr. George Jacobakis, who was very involved in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So I literally grew up hearing about these scrolls, and I was always fascinated by them. Then, as time went on, I had some interesting opportunities. One being that there was a church that purchased the facsimiles of the Dead Sea Scrolls. I became involved in that, and I went kind of on tour with them, including to Cal State Fullerton, bringing the facsimiles of the great Isaiah scroll and so forth. And I did a lot of research, obviously, on the Dead Sea Scrolls, and even presented a talk at Cal State Fullerton at a Dead Sea Scroll symposium with other scholars in that field. So there's some background here, but I got to tell you, a lot of people don't know about what the Dead Sea Scrolls are about. They don't know. And I'll tell you the most funny incident that I can remember. So I was in one of my history of Christian thought courses, and I said, you know what? Has anybody here heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls? And this lady in back put her hand right up and looked kind of upset, face of consternation. And she's all, yes, I've heard of that. And what do those squirrels have to do with Christianity? It's like, squirrels? Somehow she got confused. Dead Sea Scrolls and Dead Sea Squirrels. And apparently it just got stuck in her mind. So it kind of shows you where we're at. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and begin with the history of discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And where in the world am I getting this information from? Well, here's the fun part. I'm getting this information of how the scrolls were discovered, not only from George Jacobakis, who was affiliated with the scrolls, but also James Charlesworth, who I had a chance to interview and talk to many of the Bedouin that were involved in this process. So you're going to have a little extra bit of stories that I'm not sure are fully recorded, but are you guys ready? so here we go. All right. Okay. So from out of the desert, I got to start off dramatic. Okay. So, and any introduction has to start off with something like Lawrence of Arabia, right? So out of the desert has that sense of exotica. So from out of the desert of Judea and lost for 2,000 years, the Dead Sea Scrolls, from its very discovery in 1946, still evoke mystery and controversy today. Located near the site of Qumran, about 1 kilometer from the shores of the salt-encrusted Dead Sea, the first scrolls were discovered by Bedouin tribesmen tending their flocks one winter's day. That sounds a beautiful scene, right? you know, um, in some versions of the story, they were looking for their lost goat. This is always the kind of story that looks as innocent as possible. You know, we made this discovery, but we're looking for a goat. We're looking for a lost sheep. We have to have it join the other 99. It seems innocent. The reality is, it's most likely they were looking for treasure. They were treasure hunters. They're wanting to look like they're innocently looking for a goat or some kind of lost beast. But there we have it. And what happens is the Bedouin used to go through these cliffs trying to find treasure so they can sell this for extra loot, right? Some extra money. And so the story begins with a certain Juma Muhammad. Juma Muhammad was the first to notice what looked like a cave upon a limestone cliff face. He decided to throw a rock to estimate the size of the opening, according to the story. But when he heard the sound of something breaking, his curiosity was truly perked. The next morning, Juma, his name is Juma's cousin. So you got Juma Muhammad. So Juma Muhammad is the guy that threw the rock. But Juma's cousin, who's also named Muhammad. There's a lot of Muhammads. And it's interesting because when it comes to the discovery of the famous Nag Hammadi library, the person's name was also Muhammad. But anyway, so Juma's cousin, Muhammad ibn Dib, and Khalil Musa, seeking possible treasure, ventured into the cave. And when they ventured into this cave, their feet crunched upon broken pottery. Obviously, there had been people here before. They had gone through things. But alongside one wall, as their eyes adjusted to the darkness, they noticed that there was a series of narrow, cylindrical clay vessels. So they were curious, right? They're curious exactly what was inside. So they put their hands into these musty jars, pulling out one by one a series of scrolls wrapped in the absolutely most foul-smelling linen. I had to tell you, making ancient discoveries doesn't always smell that good. So, unbeknownst to Muhammad, the greatest academic treasure of the 20th century when it comes to ancient scholarship had just been discovered. In the hands of those two, Bedouin, happened to be the great Isaiah scroll, a commentary on the book of Habakkuk, and the community rule. Now, Muhammad was uncertain about the significance of his find. He wasn't sure, so he did recognize that these worn and brittle pieces of parchment were potentially profitable, and quickly returned to his family with his prize. Not knowing exactly their full value, the Bedouin hung, I'm not joking, he hung the valuable scrolls on a tent. Yes. Can you imagine this? Okay, so here you have the great Isaiah scroll, and hanging on a tent pole. Clearly, not fully understanding the value of what he discovered. Okay, so what happens is they eventually, of course, they go into town to Bethlehem to a dealer by the name of Ija. And Ija looked at these scrolls. He said, these scrolls are absolutely worthless. In fact, not only are they worthless, but I think that somebody took them from a Jewish synagogue. You could be in trouble. You better not talk about it. So I feel sorry for Jima because he goes down in history as somebody who was clueless. But still, word spread. And many of the Bedouin are curious because they're thinking, this is parchment. Parchment is great when it comes to making shoes. So they start looking through these caves for things that are parchment, not because they were sacred in the sense of writings, but because they could be made into use as shoes, right? So soon, the local Bedouin were searching every cliff, every wadi, and every hillock for other caves containing even more scrolls, and found them they did, cave after cave. And more of these weathered, crumbling ancient books appeared. Eventually, they found 11 main caves that would contain what later became known as the Dead Sea Scrolls. Some scrolls were neatly placed in covered cylindrical jars, while others were thrown into caves, seemingly with very little regard to their continual protection. The scrolls were in all sorts of states of preservation. Some of them were fully intact. Others were not even in their containers, and they were thrown inside of the cave. And what was left were these little tiny little pieces the size of a postage stamp. And you can imagine what a nightmare it would be for scholars to try to piece these piece them together. It's like a jigsaw puzzle, right? This great desert library um, eventually was revealed to have about 1,000 manuscripts. These texts were made either out of parchment or papyrus and were written in three different languages. They were written in Hebrew, they were written in Aramaic, and yes, they were written in Greek. The manuscripts date to the latter part of the Second Temple period, from the time of the Hasmonean dynasty to the era of the First Roman Emperor. So basically, roughly between 165 BCE to around 70 CE. Once again, 165 BCE to 70 CE. All right, so we're still not done yet. So by 1947, four of these scrolls were sold to an antiquities dealer in Bethlehem, and he had the name Kondo. Kondo. What a great name. He was you can guess this, right? He was a cobbler by trade. You know, somebody who makes shoes. That's the first person who gets a hold of the Dead Sea Scrolls, right? But the interesting part is that, as it turned out, um, he was referred to by another cobbler. There was a cobbler down the street from Kondo, and they approached him because, maybe they're precious, or maybe we can make them and use the parchment for the soles of our shoes. But this cobbler says, "Hey, I know this other cobbler, Kondo, who will be able to tell you a little bit more about this, and I think he'll be interested. I think he deals in antiquities." So as a side kind of game. So he's a cobbler, works on shoes, and then he probably works on shoes by the day and works on antiquities by night, right? So okay, so what happened is that Kondo gets a hold of it, and he looked at it. He's kind of a character. Kondo is the kind of person who who is a good talker, but he loves to talk, and he seems to never get to his point and goes on and on and on. He is also pretty eccentric. He always wore this cranberry felt tarbouche hat. So, uh, and so Kondo was interested. He didn't see this as useless leather, and he's willing to pay for these documents, all four of these scrolls, and that was good. But here's the problem: is that Kondo did find out that some of the other Bedouin had been successful in finding another cobbler, as we know from Kondo's son, finding another cobbler who indeed turned some of the Dead Sea Scrolls into shoes. So James Charlesworth, who interviewed some of these characters, not Kondo himself, his son, because Kondo had died, mentioned the fact that James is going. So I was going everywhere we talked. I know him, by the way. Is I was going everywhere looking for old discarded leather shoes for in Bethlehem in hopes of finding some Dead Sea Scroll treasures. Did I promise you I'm going to tell you stories you haven't heard before? Right? You're getting it right here. Okay, so let's keep on going. So, Kondo, that's actually his nickname. Kondo, his full name is Khalil Eskander, and he was a Syrian Orthodox Christian. And he thought that his metropolitan would be interested in this find. According to Kondo's son, a William Kondo Eskander, his father first offered these scrolls, before to both the Jordanian Department of Antiquities. So he asked basically the Jordanian Antiquities Department, "Hey, are you interested in these scrolls?" And the response, was, no, we don't have sufficient funds. So he approached the Rockefeller Museum in East Jerusalem, and they said, no, we don't have the funds. We're not really interested. Can you imagine that? The discovery of the entire 20th century when it comes to ancient artifacts, or ancient manuscripts, I should say, and they're rejecting it, right? So he thought, well, they're rejecting it. I'm going to look closer to home. So Kondo approached his metropolitan, because remember, he's a Syrian Orthodox Christian. The metropolitan's name was Mar Athanasius Yeshua Samuel. He was of the Syrian Orthodox monastery of St. Mark, and he was indeed interested in these 4 scrolls, and he purchased them from Kondo for the sum of what we can approximate in American money to $97.20. 90, what a steal, right? You gotta love Kondo. Because what Kondo does is that he immediately thought of the Bedouin, and he realized that it's part of what they had too. So Kondo only took 1/3 of that money, and 2/3 went to the Bedouin who gave it to him. So Kondo's a good guy. He really is. Okay, so meanwhile, he did ask for something. Kondo says, "Hey, could you one of those jars that they were discovered? And can I have one of them for my shop?" And of course, the Metropolitan says, "Yeah, sure, you can have that." So up until the time of his death, Kondo had one of the Dead Sea Scrolls cylinder containers in his shop, and he put it up in the loft area. And he would use that to entice customers to come in and buy shoes. And he'd say, "Come on in, and I'll let you touch the actual," was famous, of course, the actual container for the Dead Sea Scrolls. It was definitely great for business. All right, well, pleased with his purchase, right? Mar Athanasius called in experts from Hebrew University. They wanted them to examine the scrolls. And you know what happened? I know you're expecting an exciting something here. Now, after inspecting them, the scholars proclaimed, quote, "They are not particularly significant," unquote. Hebrew University said they're not significant. I gotta tell you, this tells you that some scholars are not really good scholars at all. Here they had it. I mean, there it is. Hebrew University had the chance. Later on, they're all, "Please bring it to us." But at this point, they're all, it's nothing, you know. So this is going on. Mar Athanasius actually felt cheated of his $97.20 for something so worthless. Okay. So meanwhile, okay, so this is going on, Kondo Athanasius thing, right? Meanwhile, there were other Bedouin who discovered a few things. Another group of Bedouin sold 3 of their scrolls to another antique dealer by the name of Salihi. Salihi. Now what happens is that there was another professor at Hebrew University, not part of those ones that said it's not significant, but another one. And his name was Eliezer Lipa Sukanik. And Sukanik heard about the discovery, and he wished to give these scrolls a look. Here's the problem. There are now mounting tensions in the Middle East, especially right now in 1948, where it looks like there's going to be a big war going on. And so Sukanik arranged a clandestine meeting with an Armenian antiquities dealer who knew Salihi in Bethlehem, and they agreed to meet at the British divided military zone at the Jerusalem border. So you have this clandestine meeting between this professor from Hebrew University and this Armenian antiquities dealer who represents the guy that has the scrolls, and they actually talk through the barbed wire. And what happens is that this dealer, what he does is that he shows, look at that quickly through the, he goes, look. He shows Sukunek the part of the manuscript through the barbed wire, and Sukunek's going, oh wow, he's so wait a minute, this is ancient Hebrew writing. Okay, I want to see more. I want to see these. He gets excited. Okay, so now Sukunek has to go journeying to Bethlehem to see and maybe acquire these manuscripts. But this time, war is imminent. Okay, and there's hostilities going on, and so what they do is they risk their lives. Seriously, this is a bad time. There, and so what happens is the Armenian antique dealer, he picks them up, and they go through a maze of security and barbed wire fences and soldiers and all kinds of things, and they get to Bethlehem. Now, Sukunek is there from Hebrew University. He's at Bethlehem, and he approaches Salihi, and Salihi's all, "Hey, how's it going?" And just like Kanda, Salihi is long-winded. In fact, I can tell you, he is so long-winded. How long-winded is he? They actually talked for hours without even mentioning the scrolls. He kept offering him with this cardamom-flavored Turkish coffee. Would you like to have more coffee? So, do you have any kids? I have kids. It's like, can I actually see these scrolls? Eventually, Sukunuk was able to observe these scrolls, and Sukunuk is what he does. One of his areas, of course, is that he studies Jewish ossuaries, and so he knows very well the Hebrew letters that are inscribed on various Jewish ossuaries, and these are, of course, limestone bone burial boxes. And so, what happens here is that he then examines it, and he realizes that the shape and configuration of these letters are at least 2,000 years old. Eureka. This is a big deal. So this was what will become known as the War Scroll, the Thanksgiving Scroll, and a second copy of Isaiah. As far as the asking price, $324. Sukunek did not have enough to purchase a fourth scroll, which is a partial text of the book of Isaiah, known as Isaiah Manuscript 2, but later he raised funds to acquire that also. All right, so now we got it so far. So now you got two sets of scrolls, right? Well, news travels fast in Bethlehem. You're figuring this out by now. Not only amongst the cobblers, but others, right? News travels fast. And Mar Athanasius, remember, he thought he got ripped off, with his scrolls, because he paid 97, I mean, he purchased it for $97. Well, now we heard that that on the other side of town, as it turned out, that this other Salihi, received the wonderful amount from Sukunik. He received over $300. It's like, okay, so $324. He said, well, this is obviously worth something. Why is everybody rejecting it? So what happens is that Mar Athanasius, what he does is that he takes his four scrolls to the American School of Oriental Research. He takes them there in 1948, and they're observed. And a scholar, so interesting, A scholar by the name of John Trevor is a PhD in Old Testament from Yale University. Observes, takes a look at these, and says, "Wow, these are pretty impressive, right?" Now, what he does is he compares the Dead Sea Scrolls to what is called the Nash Papyrus. It's called the Nash Papyrus. Now, the Nash Papyrus was discovered in Egypt back in 1898. It was initially dated to the 2nd century CE, but later on, it came to be dated between 150 to 100 BCE. And he realized that the lettering matched that of these scrolls. In fact, by the way, the Nash Papyrus, basically it's a text of the 10 Commandments and part of the Shema, which begins, "Hear, O Israel." The author of the Nash Papyrus was attempting to harmonize the version of the 10 Commandments referred to in Exodus 20, 2 through 17, with the version of the 10 Commandments in Deuteronomy 5, 6 through 21. What is interesting is they both seem to leave out certain aspects. For example, the references to Egypt. That's because they came from Egypt, because Egypt is determined as not a good place. Well, in the other, of course, the current versions, but this obviously said no. Now, when John Trevor sent the photo, John Trevor, what he does is he photographs these scrolls. Okay, so he photographs these scrolls, which of course is the great Isaiah scroll, the Commentary of Habakkuk, the Manual of Discipline. What I find is interesting is I'm kind of the weird way I'm connected to this part of the story. It's like, what? What, the Nash photographs? Okay, here we go. So what happened is he photographed these scrolls when they were in pristine condition. They're perfect condition. No deterioration, excellent, right? And so these photographs are excellent. They're amazing. What you don't know is that the Dead Sea Scrolls are not treated very well. We don't know during the 1940s and 50s how to really preserve things to stay around for us to enjoy, to appreciate, and it starts to turn brown and discolors. But hey, they even break apart. Scholars discovered something in the 1950s that was a great revelation. These scrolls start to break up. They found a solution. It's called Scotch tape. So there's Scotch taping. I told you I'm telling you too much. You're learning way too much, more than you should. The Scotch tape, you guys know that when you Scotch tape after a while, it's not very good. It turns brown and brittle. Well, yes. And so what happened is that these Dead Sea Scrolls are not in the most pristine condition. In some cases, many of them are difficult to read. And that's important because, you're reading the Hebrew, right? And you got to make sure you have a way to read it in a clear sense. So what happened is later on, scholars wanted to have a clearer version of these manuscripts. So what they did is they used these photographs as the way to be able to see in a clear way, what is being said. And what is so interesting is that later on, what they did is they took these photographs and leveraging technology, laser technology, on vegetable paper, they lasered these photographs directly onto this animal paper, and what happened as a result, the plant paper. So what happens is that it created these wonderful facsimiles, and they didn't produce that many of them. They produced, I think, about 4, and a person I know purchased one of them, and those are the ones I used to travel with and toured with. And scholars would want to see these because because they're clearer than the originals. That makes sense right off the photographs. So It's pretty amazing. Of course, you got those mystical types that say, well, the energy from the original got transferred via the laser onto on this paper, and so they must have special energies and powers. And but you gotta love humanity, right? Okay, let's keep going. All right, so I am a little bit part of that part of the story when it came to the photographs. Okay, continuing on. Well, you're thinking the story's over yet. This is actually a story that's never told, and I'm so happy you're able to hear the story. This is all worth it because I've been wanting to tell this story for a long time, and people don't know this story. You're going to hear another whole version in books, and since I've met some of the people and talked to the people who have been in these kinds of positions, I want to offer you the real story. And I am giving my sources if you hadn't noticed. Okay, moving right along. Okay, so okay, you have the Nash Papyrus. We know it's old. John Trevor sent the photographs of these scrolls to the famous archaeologist by the name of William F. Albright, and he immediately wired back, stating, quote, "Congratulations, you have in your possession the most important manuscript find of the 20th century." Wow. Wow, okay, this is huge. Okay, but there's too much turmoil in this region. So the Metropolitan, Athanasius, decided that you thought you got to hold on to this. He's going to smuggle himself and the manuscripts to, guess where? New Jersey. What? And the Dead Sea Scrolls end up in New Jersey. See, the Garden State. Well, the Dead Sea Scrolls are now in New Jersey, the United States. They arrived in 1949. You just can't make this up. And it was in possession of the Syrian church located there. Meanwhile, the Jordanian government declared that he was a traitor. I'm not sure that's fair for Mar Athanasius, because didn't he offer it to the Jordanians first? He did. He did. And they didn't want it. They said they didn't have the budget. But now that's been pronounced as something that is, one of the major finds of the 20th century. Well, now they want it. However, he's in New Jersey. Now, many of you may be from New Jersey. Everything's okay. But, it's not the perfect place to sell a manuscript. It arrives there in 1949. Nobody wants it. What? So in 1954, Athanasius placed an ad in the Wall Street Journal, and there were no responses. Nobody wants it. Okay. But good news is a certain Yigael Yadin, son of the professor Sukenek, remember Sukenek with the other manuscripts, right? Sukenek had died in 1953. He made an offering price, and he purchased the 4 scrolls on behalf of the state of Israel. The cost, $250,000. It's a lot more than than the initial price, right? He knows how this price just kind of keeps going up, right? So, all right. So anyway, a lot more than $97. The value is definitely going up. All right, so now the scrolls are now being kind of brought together. I will say this too. I feel sorry for Mar Athanasius, because what he did is he had to kind of sell this in a surreptitious way because he didn't want the Jordanian government to be after him. So what he did is he created this trust, but he kind of messed up on the trust, and the IRS looked at it and and he thought it was more of a personal account than a church account, and he took the majority of what he got. So, and the IRS. So basically, part of the Dead Sea Scrolls were the money from that paid the IRS. Okay, I got to tell you, that's one of the most convoluted stories. It's up there with the Nag Hammadi. It's pretty humorous. Well, finally, we're getting the scrolls and more are being discovered. So why are these important? As I joke, right? I should avoid the Dead Sea Scroll, the Dead Sea water, right? This and they seem to elevate people. Maybe they elevate my spirits. Okay, bad jokes. I'm stopping. So the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the world of scholarship regarding the Bible significantly changed, along with our understanding of both early Judaism and the roots of Christianity. One of the most important contributions for biblical studies is the fact that not only do the Dead Sea Scrolls present over 100 copies of books from the Hebrew Bible. You heard that right. Over 100 copies of books from the Hebrew Bible. But that from this selection, every single book of the Hebrew Bible is represented from Genesis all the way to Malachi, with the sole exception of the book of Esther. They're all represented. So we must remember that before the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, our oldest Hebrew manuscripts of the Bible were from the 9th century CE, the 9th century CE. So the Dead Sea Scrolls dramatically moved that date over 1,000 years earlier to the 1st century BCE. Is that making sense? This is quite a discovery, right? Now, roughly about 40% of these scrolls are copies from texts from the Hebrew Bible. So 40% of the discoveries, they're from the Hebrew Bible. So, okay. 30% of the Dead Sea Scrolls include books that would eventually not be canonized as part of the Hebrew Bible, but for many were understood as inspired. These are considered sacred books. One example, of course, this will interest many of you, the Book of Enoch. This apocalyptic text was discovered amongst the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Wisdom of Sirach, the Book of Tobit, the Book of Jubilees. There's even 2 Psalms that were added to the current chapter 152 of the Psalms. So there you have it. Finally, the last 30% are sectarian in origin, sectarian. For instance, the Dead Sea Scrolls manuscripts include the Manual of Discipline, the commentary to the book of Habakkuk, the commentary to the book of Isaiah, the Copper Scroll, Ecclesiastes, so forth. But so anyway, so you have these additional ones, okay? Of course, you have the War Scroll that describes the great battle between the sons of light and the sons of darkness. Sectarian commentaries. So we know that these scrolls are connected to a certain sect or sects of Judaism. Many people saying they are connected to the Essenes, while others will say, well, maybe they're the Sicarii or the Zealots. We'll go into that in a little bit. So, or maybe early precursors to Christianity. The most greatest of the finds, of course, is the great Isaiah scroll. It's the earliest complete copy of any Old Testament book in existence. It's pretty amazing. A lot of people looked at this because it's huge. It's a gigantic scroll. I mean, it really is a great Isaiah scroll. It's 7 meters long. And so that means the facsimile of the great Isaiah scroll that was taken right off the photographs that I mentioned, I had to lug around in these huge bulky display cases. But by the way, eventually the display even got to downtown Fullerton on Harbor. I think Terry saw it. So yeah, I mean, yeah. Remember that came right off the photographs. That came right off the original manuscript. So there you have it. All right. So what else interesting about this is that a lot of people doubt how old it is. So what they did is not only do the letters match, but they carbon 14 dated this 4 different times. 4 times, not just once, not twice, not 3 times, 4 times. And every time the dates came between 335 to 107 BCE. So most scholars say it dates between 150 to 100 BCE. That's pretty old. Okay. The manuscript, of course, was obviously understood as the word of God. It was considered, in many cases, sacred. Did you guys know that when you copy a manuscript like this, you're supposed to say the words out loud? You guys know that. You have to say those words out loud, pronounce them out loud. And so that means when they're writing these down, they're pronouncing them because it is the word that is holy. There's a long story, but way back when the Bible wasn't written down, it was memorized because it was considered so sacred. Uh, at least the first 5 books. And there's mnemonic devices or memory devices within these books, repetitions that enable us to remember them. And then later on, like books like like the First and Second Kings, First and Second Chronicles, they were originally written down right away. But these earlier books took a long time because it's believed to be too sacred. It's the Word of God. And people are saying, well, what about the 10 Commandments? Yeah, written by the hand of God, right? His finger. So eventually they came with this compromise. And the idea is that you could say the various words and write them down at the same time. And that's kosher. So you could say them and write them down at the same time, and that's okay. But you can't say the name of God. So you say the name Adonai instead. And in many cases of these manuscripts, there's like little blank spots where the name of God is supposed to be. You want to write that down. Is this helpful? You guys learning things? In fact, Rabbi Bariah said that each commandment, each letter had absolute importance. He once declared that if you leave out one single letter or write a single letter too much, you will be found as one who destroys the whole world. Found as one who destroys the whole world. It's like, uh-oh. Yeah, so there's a little pressure on rabbis to be very exact. What I find is interesting is the Great Isaiah Scroll. There are some small differences between the Great Isaiah Scroll and the manuscript starting in the 900 CE. But for the most part, it's pretty darn close. I mean, really close. So it is a testimony to how well these scribes were trained when it comes to the transmission of information. But the Great Isaiah Scroll from the 2nd century BCE matches the Masoretic text in many ways. There are some differences. There absolutely are differences, but not a lot. The Masoretic text from the 9th into the 10th centuries. Isn't that fascinating? Right? At least for me it is. Okay. So there you have it. Another one that was discovered is the community the community rule, called the Manual of Discipline. And obviously this connects to one of the sect of whoever is connected to the Dead Sea Scrolls. The community rule, it basically is crucial for understanding the community that produced or possibly produced these scrolls. It deals with topics like the admission of new members, how you're supposed to act at communal meals, theological doctrines like cosmic dualism and predestination and the elect. And I'm starting to sound like I'm a Calvinist. Well, you gotta. Anyway, I'll stop there. So anyway, according to the community rule, the sacred meal of bread and new wine was practiced on a weekly basis by those who are of this community, looking forward to the day when the Messiah would be present at this sacred meal. Isn't that interesting? In fact, I have it right here, So it goes on. It talks about the fact, here it is here. And the wise men of the holy congregation, each in order of his dignity, sat, and when they shall gather together for a common table to eat and to drink the new wine, when the common table shall be set for eating, and the new wine poured for drinking. Let no man extend his hand over the first fruits of the bread and wine before the priest. For it is he who shall bless the first fruits of bread and wine, and shall be the first to extend his hand over the bread. Thereafter, the Messiah of Israel shall extend his hand over the bread, and all the congregation of the community shall utter a blessing, each man in the order of his dignity. It is according to this statute that they shall proceed to every meal, sacred meal, at which at least 10 men are gathered together. What I find is interesting about this is that this holy meal of, you saw bread and wine, right, were to be done looking forward to the fact that the Messiah is going to come and they'll be performing a similar sacred meal. It's difficult not to make a connection with the Christian communion. You see the connection? Oh, yeah, it's a little too close, right? All right, let's keep on going, right? Um, Moving right along. Oh, by the way, also the community rule, which I find is fascinating, is that it has many similarities to monastic rules, like the rule of Saint Benedict. And so the discovery of the community rule, in many ways, is one of the earliest that we have of these kinds of ascetic communities. You have the War Scroll. The War Scroll talks about, it's also called the War of the Sons of Light and Sons of Darkness. And so it goes into the fact that there will be a great war that will break out between the sons of light and the sons of darkness. The sons of light are known as the Yahad, and this war will last 40 years. But then the Kittim of Assyria will lead the first phase of the war against the sons of light. Many people connect the Kittim with the Romans, although others will say, no, those are the Greeks. Now, what will happen is that during this period, the Kittim of Asher are allied with Edom, Moab, Ammon, and Philistia. And during the second part of the war, the Jews who rejected the message of the sons of light, are called the violators of the covenant, will join the sons of darkness. So we have this great betrayal. A lot of this takes place in Egypt. And the third phase, the Kittim will of course be connected to the kings of the north, and it'll be a very bloody battle indeed, with 7 engagements altogether. But at the very end, the great hand of God shall overcome Belial, which is Satan, and all the angels of his dominion, and all the men of his forces shall be destroyed forever. So there you have it. One interesting part about this is that there is this, the scroll describes another stage that has a seemingly dualistic aspect to it, and it's under the leadership of the Prince of Light, who is called Michael the Archangel. That's interesting. It's kind of a messianic figure, but it's Michael the Archangel, and who goes against, of course, the sons of the darkness. I want to tell you about this next one. You are going to love this. He discovered called Copper Scroll. Copper Scroll. It was discovered on March 20th, 1952. And what it is, it's a description of treasure, hidden treasure that's underneath the Temple Mount. The scroll is actually made of copper. It took forever to unroll. I mean, the copper scroll is an inventory of various treasures, gold and silver, ritual vessels, and it tells you exactly where they are buried. In fact, 64 deposit sites are identified in and around the Temple Mount. Most scholars agree that this treasure map is legitimate. So is there treasure, Dr. Rietveld, underneath the mountain, the the Temple Mount? Is there treasure? And the answer is, well, there was. Some people think that the Romans may have discovered not this particular map, but maybe another one, or they just discovered it in general. Can I give you the gossip, of course? And that is, you guys ever heard of the Knights Templar? And of course, the story is the Knights Templar supposedly found something underneath the temple. But the very fact that this scroll testifies that there was something of treasure under the Temple Mount in Jerusalem may connect to the fact that maybe they did discover something. What do you think? Yeah, that's right. So it's kind of interesting from my perspective, or maybe from yours. Okay, you also have the temple scroll that describes this ideal temple to be found. Okay, the work claims to provide the details of God's instructions to Moses in regards to the construction and operation of the temple. It was supposed to be kind of like a new book of Moses, and it combines the laws of the temple and sacrifices with some new laws, some new additional laws. So there you have it. You also have the commentary of Habakkuk, which is pretty complete. And two major subjects are treated in this composition. One relates to the internal religious politics of Jerusalem, and the other, the temple priesthood. Sorry, I should say the internal politics of Jerusalem and the temple priesthood, and the other repercussions because of the Romans. So we'll talk about this later because we'll get there. It mentions also certain individuals known as the teacher of righteousness, the wicked priest, the man of lies, as well as others, and talks about the Kittim. Well, okay, all right. So when we take a look at these scrolls, we can observe that the concept of the end amongst the Qumran community was not really a simple sentiment. It was not a vague belief in the finality of all things, but had advanced into this very complicated apocalyptic theology directly related to their everyday ideas and everyday life. They really waited with anticipation for this day to come. In fact, in many ways, their community was defined by the confidence that they were uniquely positioned at the very edge of time, securely allotted with the righteous as the holy ones. The Dead Sea Scrolls included a lot of apocalyptic literature that was also circulated within other Jewish as well as Christian communities, including much of the end time materials ascribed to a certain book of Enoch, which many of you are interested in. As noted by James Charlesworth of Princeton, he says clearly the Qumran community was an apocalyptic community because it originated within and was continuously being shaped fundamentally by diverse apocalyptic traditions. Apocalypticism and apocalyptic theology cannot be reduced to one literary genre or one continuously flowing tradition. Biblical prophecy, biblical wisdom, as well as influences from cultures contiguous with Palestine, especially Persia, Egypt, and Greece, swirled together to create something new and unprecedented: Jewish apocalyptic theology. Unquote. And mixed in here, there is a lot of Zoroastrian dualism. Zoroastrianism, of course, goes back to 700 BCE, and you're going to see many of these ideas of the forces of light and the forces of darkness coming together, and many of its apocalyptic ideas are found within Zoroastrianism. So we know Persian influence is coming in, and is coming in strongly and blending with Judaism, right? One of the documents from Qumran refers to his Messiah, who shall be obeyed by the heavens and the earth. He, the Lord Adonai, who shall be obeyed, will, it says, raise the dead to life. So you're going to have a messianic figure that raises the dead to life. The name of this particular work is known as, and fittingly, On the Resurrection. So there you have it. There are excerpts. There are many, I should say, pieces that have been found that talks about the idea of a new Jerusalem that arrives at the end of time. We're going to see this in the book of Revelation. Well, this community already believes in this new Jerusalem that will indeed arrive. In fact, there's even references that sound just like the book of Revelation, like the apocalypse. It says, "Then he brought me within the city block." This is the New Jerusalem, and showed me the houses in it. From gate to gate, there were 15 houses in one direction to the corner, 7 from the corner of the other gate. He kind of goes on. This is a very strange description of a house of 22 beds and 11 closed windows above the beds. What? A house of 22 beds and 11 closed windows above the beds. There's insight here, obviously here. But yes, so there's a new Jerusalem that will arrive at the very end of time after the arrival of the Messiah. So you're going to see in eschatology many of the ideas that you see in Christianity will already be here within this community, and 100 to 200 years prior, right? So accordingly, there are two kinds of people. There are the righteous who thank God, and the unfaithful who are completely sinful. And a secret knowledge is revealed only to those who are righteous. And they're known as God's elect. They are chosen from a long time ago, and their knowledge is to be concealed. I think it's fascinating that you have the concept of secret knowledge. This sounds like a lot like Gnosticism in many ways, right? So there you have it. You also have the idea of two messiahs. You're going to have a Davidic Messiah, who is a political Messiah that's from the line of David, and he will be a part of a actual physical battle in the here and now against real forces, and then physical forces, and then you're going to have another Messiah who is a priestly Messiah from the line of Aaron, and this will be a great eschatological battle, the very end of time, with the angels versus the demons, and and of course, it's interesting because God and Satan are mentioned in both versions. So, but you have two messiahs. In Christianity, it's fascinating that the two messiahs become one in the concept of Jesus. Okay, so there you have it. Now, moving right along, let's take a look at some of the figures. Okay. So, what about the origins of the Dead Sea Scrolls? How do we decipher it? Well, taking a look at the Damascus document and the Commentary of Habakkuk, we realize that this community has somebody that is called the teacher of righteousness. According to the Dead Sea Scrolls, he was truly a gifted priest who received direct messages from God on exactly how to interpret the laws of Moses, right? It says, of course, that he was the one who teaches the law to his council and to all who volunteer to join the elect ones of God who keep the law in the council of the community, who will be saved from the day of judgment. Furthermore, God was believed to actually talk through this teacher of righteousness. He has a voice of authority, and that those will follow his words, according to the Commentary of Habakkuk, right? And through him, the righteous shall live by his faith, right? You have another character that's known as the man of lies. Mentioned the man of lies in the community. He's empowered, this man of lies, he's empowered to harden the hearts of those who may consider the words of the righteous priest and lead them away from the righteous path altogether. They even call him spouter of lies, right? Who leads astray in order to build his city of vanity on blood and erect an assembly upon lying for the sake of his glory, tiring out many with his worthless service and instructing them in works of lying so that their works will be of emptiness. So basically, lots of lying. Sorry, he's deceptive. You got to say lying like at least 5 or 10 times just to get the point, right? Uh, the next person is the flattery group is a flattery seekers. They defy the righteous priest. The fourth character is known as the wicked priest. Um, he is open to the ideas at first of the righteous teacher, and he becomes a ruler of Israel. So he's open. He becomes a ruler of Israel, then falls into corruption and greed, and then begins to persecute the righteous teacher and his followers. Okay, so he at first he goes, "Yeah, you guys are great." He goes, "No, no, I'm going to betray you." And finally, you have the Kitta, and of course, these are understood as either the Greeks or the Romans, but they're for sure Gentiles, right? There are three frameworks for understanding the historical context of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And yes, I'm going to give it to you. You're not going to hear this too often, so take advantage. So here it is. You're hearing everything directly. Okay, so the most popular interpretation is known as the standard model. And the standard model, if you want to write this down, you can, has basically three legs of support when it comes to the date and the context of the Dead Sea Scrolls. The first leg of support is that the authors of the Dead Sea Scrolls were Essenes or were connected in some way with the Essenes. They were Essenes and were connected in some way, to them. Anyway, second leg of the standard model is that during that this community was anti-Hasmonean. Anti-Hasmonean, what does that mean? In other words, it is against the Jewish rulers during the time of the Maccabees. They're against the Jewish rulers from 165 to 63 BCE. So once again, so the first one is they're Essenes, they're connected to the Essene community. The second one is that they're anti-Hasmonean, right? They're not supportive of it. They are against the regime. And finally, the third one is that we know is known. It's called the Mother House hypothesis, wherein the nearby archaeological site of Khirbet Qumran is used as the measure or determine the history of the community. So the date of this archaeological site is used to date the context of when the Dead Sea Scrolls are written. Now, a lot of people say, we'll go there, that the community of Qumran is not related to the Dead Sea Scrolls, that they're just, that there's no real connection. I kind of find that hard to believe. I really do, especially since there's the article I published with James Charlesworth. Especially if you take a look, and you can see right here, there's a Qumran community, and those hills are the caves. So when I was there, caves are literally right behind it. So I don't know. Anyway, we'll go there in a few moments, but I'm just kind of throwing that one out. Maybe it helps if you actually visit the site to make these connections, as opposed to sit around in your chair in your office going, "Yeah, I don't think they're connected." Maybe you want to actually walk the grounds. Okay, so here we go. So let's go for the first leg of the standard model, that they're connected to the Essenes. Yes, there are many similarities to what we find in the Dead Sea Scrolls to the community mentioned by many different sources. For example, Pliny the Elder talks about the Essenes. Philo of Alexandria. So Pliny the Younger, he lived in the first part of the first century. You got Philo of Alexandria. He talks about the Essenes. He lives between the latter part of the first century BCE to the latter part of the second century, latter part of the first century CE, excuse me. And then, of course, you have Josephus. He talks about them too, So you have three different sources. Josephus is also the first century CE. Pliny, I'm going to read Pliny's just for fun. Pliny the Elder writes, lying on the west of Asphaltius, the sufficient distance to escape its noxious exhalations, that's the Dead Sea, are the Esseni, a people who live apart from the world and marvelous beyond all others throughout the whole earth, where they have no women amongst them. To sexual desire, they are strangers. Money they have none. The palm trees are their only companions. Nothing like palm trees as companions, right? Okay, I'll keep going. Day after day, however, their numbers are fully recruited by multitudes of strangers that resort to them, driven tethered to adopt their usage by the tempests of fortune and wearied with the miseries of life. And he goes on to give an actual location. He talks about the fact that formerly the town of Ingada, second only to Hiroshima in the fertility of its soil. And in fact, he talks about the Lake Asphaltus, which is the Dead Sea. In fact, he talks about how it's close to Masada. He says, next to it, we come to Masada, a fortress on rock. Why are we reading Pliny the Elder? His location fits exactly where Qumran is. So, maybe there is a connection, right? So is Qumran connected to the Essenes? Well, you have a primary source that tells you its exact location. That was pretty good. So anyway, just throw that one in for good measure. Other parts, though, about the Essenes, we take a look and we realize that they are mentioned to be men of peace. They are very much focused on meditation, love of God, love of virtue, and love of mankind, according to Josephus. Which matches up with the scrolls is the fact that it's mentioned that in the first place, then there's no one who has a house so absolutely his own private property that it does not, in some sense, also belong to everyone. For besides that, they all dwell together in companies, houses open to all those of the same notions who come to them. It's interesting because, according to the Dead Sea Scrolls, just like the Essenes, they share all things together. They are equal as one. It even says their food is common, sharing all things in common. We also know that the Essenes were ascetic. They were deeply philosophical, as I had mentioned. And I want to get to this really cool quote. Let's see here. Against luxury here, devoted to God. Initiation, of course, is through baptism. That's fascinating. And we know that those of Qumran, we know that that's the scroll community, that is the same. Okay. They revere Moses, of course, a very strict hierarchy. Just kind of going through these notes. But here it is. I want to read this to you. Unlike the Pharisees, the Essenes do not believe in a physical resurrection, only a spiritual resurrection. For the material is corruptible, while the spirit can be free of corruption. They do believe this. So they are kind of Gnostic, but they are also believe in the idea of spirit. I'm just going to go ahead and read what Josephus says. For their doctrine is this, that bodies are corruptible and that the matter they are made of is not permanent, but that the souls are immortal and continue forever, and that they come out of the most subtle air and are united to their bodies as to prisons, into which they are drawn by certain natural enticements. But that when they are set free from the bonds of the flesh, then they, as released from a long bondage, rejoice and mount upward. Wow. I mean, this sounds very much like Greek ideas, right? Like Roman ideas. And this is Judaism, and these are the Essenes. Isn't that fascinating? You're learning so much here, right? Okay, of course they value prophecy. There's a few disagreements. Like, for example, Josephus of Philo of Alexandria, he can't seem to agree whether or not the Essenes uh, practiced sacrifices or not. And there's a disagreement over whether there are women or not within the community. But other than that, a lot of what's described about the Essenes do match the community as mentioned in the Dead Sea Scrolls. But there are a few differences. One is the fact that the Dead Sea Scroll community seems a little bit less peaceful and a little bit more warlike. So maybe an offshoot of the Essenes, we can go there, right? Okay, so that is the standard model, right? And as I mentioned before, when it comes to the site, the mother conversation, when it comes to the site of Qumran, its proximity to the places where the caves are that had the Dead Sea Scrolls are pretty close. Some people have said, well, this is just simply a Roman villa. You know, it could be something else. And it is true that it is very difficult to determine. We know it flourished during the time, during the Hasmonean period of time, all the way up to 68. And there was destruction. The Romans did attack this area. There's evidence of fire. It looks like that they burned their own place down. And there is evidence that looks like places where they would do the sacred bathing. But other people said, but maybe these are just nets. But we do have a description of exactly where it is from Pliny the Elder, and it seems to match. So that's the standard model. There is another model. Okay. But before we go there, I want to mention that the standard model, its idea is as follows. When it comes to the righteous teacher, we don't know who the righteous teacher is. We don't know exactly who it is. But what we do know is the righteous teacher was the founder of whatever this community is, right? And so what they do is they put together the idea that, the context for this happens to be the third or the second century BCE. I'll go through this. Give me a few seconds. So by deduction, the standard model must view that whoever is the high priest at this time, during the time of the second century, must be the wicked priest. Okay. Where are they getting this from? And I'm going to go ahead and give you this. We may go about 10 minutes over, not too much. Well, I don't think. But the reason is the standard model takes a look at this and says, well, they're anti-Hasmonean for this reason, is that they seem to be against the rulers, the Maccabees, who thrived from 165 to 63 BCE. And they get this from the Damascus document. The Damascus document says as follows. When in their treachery Israel abandoned him, he turned away from Israel and from his sanctuary and gave them up to the sword. But when he remembered the covenant of the forefathers, he left a remnant to Israel and did not allow them to be totally destroyed. But in a time of wrath, 390 years, when he put them into the power of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, he took care of them and caused them to grow fat on the good produce of his soil. They considered their iniquity, and they knew that they were guilty men and had been like the blind and like those groping for way 20 years. But God considered their deeds and that sought them with their whole heart. So he raised up for them a teacher of righteousness to guide them in the way of his heart. You're going, why are you reading all this? You'll see why. I just gave you the context, right, from the Damascus document. So what they do is they use math, they count, and they look, and they say, well, there's an encryption here, and you count backwards in ancient Hebrew, and you got 390 years. And of course, the conquest of Nebuchadnezzar occurred in 586 BCE. And so this places the date of the righteous teacher around 196 BCE. Isn't that great? 196 BCE. Then it mentions them sojourning for 20 years, and that brings it to 176 BCE. And that's how they get the date. As easy as that, right? Well, now you know. So taking a look at this period of time, who's going to be the high priest? Well, it'll be Jonathan Maccabees. Will eventually become high priest, not right away, certainly not 176, but soon after he'll become the high priest. And many scholars think that Jonathan is the wicked priest. And the reason why they think he's the wicked priest that's mentioned is the fact that before that time, the high priesthood came from the descendants of Zadok. Descendants of Zadok. That was the priestly line that was established under King David. But what happened is that Jonathan, who was simply a ruler over Judea, simply a ruler, simply a Hasmonean, was given the designation of being ruler and high priest. That didn't go over very well because you kind of broke some rules there. The other problem is that he was given this designation not by anybody in Judea, but he was given this designation of being the high priest by the Greek king Alexander Bolus. Alexander Bolus, who was a pagan Greek king, was also a pretender. He's the one that made Jonathan a high priest. And how can a pagan king make somebody a high priest? So, yeah, you would know there would be a reaction to this, right? So the claim is that the teacher of righteousness goes, no, we can't accept, we can accept him as a ruler, but we can't accept Jonathan as a king. And he gets pretty upset and they go off. Does that make sense? So that's the reasoning why they have that date designation. All right, well, you have another model, and this is the wise model. He's one of the translators and commentators for the official Dead Sea Scrolls book that you can get at all the bookstores. So this version it's called the Robert Wise Cook model, and Abegg as well, Abegg, that's somebody's last name. And what this says is that no, it doesn't, the designation is not the 2nd century BCE as the first model, it's the 1st century BCE, and they're not anti-Hasmonean altogether, but they turn anti-Hasmonean eventually. They take a look at the evidence, and it seems to connect with the idea that Jonathan that's mentioned is not Jonathan, who's the earlier ruler priest. It's a reference to Alexander Jannaeus, who was the quintessential villain against the Pharisees. And of course, the Essenes didn't like the Pharisees very much. And so what happened is that Alexander Jannaeus is the lion of wrath who crucified the flattery seekers. And the flattery seekers, according to this theory, are the Pharisees. Now, there's some evidence to support this. One of them is the fact that Alexander Jannaeus is actually mentioned in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And so is his wife Salome under the Jewish name Shalamozen, right? She's mentioned. And they even mention Hyrcanus II and Aristobulus II. They even mention a Roman general by name. So all these figures happen to be in the 1st century BCE, right? So they're saying, well, this must be the context. And the person who's a teacher of righteousness could be Judas the Essene. So that's a possibility. You take a look, and going through this, you look at the paleography, and I do have to say that the majority of the scrolls do date from the 1st century BCE. That's the bulk of them. And as I said before, they mention these figures within the context. All right, so there you have it, right? So who wrote them according to the Wise thesis? First of all, it is a sect or group who oppose the Pharisees. Second of all, the internal evidence from the scrolls takes out the possibility that they were Sadducees. For instance, the Sadducees did not even believe in predestination amongst their own views, and we know the Dead Sea sect did. Third, we know that this group was not isolated from the world. It was very active in the politics of the day. And fourth, this group did at this time advocate violent solutions to current problems. so, so there you have it. Okay, the last one is the Eisman novel. Sorry, the Eisman theory. I'm laughing. This is like a book that's just, it's like, is it a book or is it a weapon? Okay, so the Eisman thesis moves it even further. So while the standard model, which is of course supported by a large portion of scholars, including Charles Worth, who I just mentioned, is the idea that the context is the 2nd century BCE, okay, with Jonathan as the wicked priest. The Way's model is the fact that no, the context is the 1st century BCE, and of course, the wicked priest is connected to the fall of Alexander Jannaeus, and it's connected also to his wife, who they apparently did not like. So that's the context. But Eisman, he's an important guy because he was the one who got upset that the Dead Sea Scrolls are taking forever to be published. He did help in that area, but his degree is Islam. He's not really credentialed in this area. But anyway, his view is that the Dead Sea Scrolls date from the 1st century, and they refer to Christianity. That it's the Christian community. So Robert Eisman believes that the righteous teacher is James the Righteous, who is the brother of Jesus. He believes the wicked priest is the high priest Ananias. And finally, as for the spouter of lies, Eisman says that this is the Apostle Paul. The Apostle Paul is the spouter of lies. And Jesus, Eisman, in this incredibly thick book, leaves Jesus out, saying that Jesus may not even be a historical figure at all. And James the Righteous is the only reality. Here's the problem with the Eisman theory, is that in order to support the 1st century CE context, that it is indeed actually just Christianity, that the Essene community, the Qumran community, not the Essene, but the Qumran community is just early Christianity. Here's the problem. It goes against all the dating systems. It goes against the letters, the script. It goes against the carbon dating. It goes from the archaeological context. I mean, he is fighting a lot of evidence to come up with his ideas. Of course, recently he's kind of backpedaled a little bit, saying that these ideas were actually earlier, and that early Christianity started in the 1st century BCE. So that's how he's slowly accommodated it. But yeah, there we have it. So okay. Well, now we're going to go. I want to do something about this. I want to go ahead, and this is how we're going to kind of conclude a little bit. And that is, I want to make sure that we are able to compare the Qumran sect with early Christianity. Okay, so and I know, hang on, it's pretty interesting stuff. Okay, so there are a few camps. The first camp that's reported by the late Raymond Brown, who's a Catholic scholar. He says that any relation that may exist between the scrolls and the New Testament would have to be indirect. So he thinks that the influence of the Dead Sea Scrolls are indirect, adding that it is quite possible that some Essene works influenced early Christian writers, and that the Qumrites and a character or characters mentioned in the New Testament had some contact. But he doesn't he doesn't believe there's a direct connection. So that's the Catholic perspective in many cases. He's a very nice man. I have some of his books here from him, signed by him. The second camp includes such luminaries as James Charlesworth, K.G. Kuhn, F.M. Cross, Craig Evans, a lot of distinction. For them, what they believe, they advocated the Dead Sea Scrolls directly influenced the foundation of the New Testament and the Gospel of John. Okay, so there's a direct connection. The third camp is occupied by Robert Eisman. And he says basically the Qumran sect is the early Christians. They are the early Christians, I should say. I got to watch they happen to be who they are. So there you have it. So there's actually a fourth camp by Richard Bauckham, and he says that there's no connections whatsoever. Now we're getting to the most fun part of all. You guys ready to go? Here we go. I'm going to make you understand for yourselves what you think. Get ready. All right. Okay, so we're going to go through the similarities between the Dead Sea Scroll community and Christianity. And by the time I get done, you're just going to go, oh my goodness. You guys ready? All right, hold on. Qumran community and the early Christians share the very same favorite books as Scripture, as revealed by the New Testament Gospels. They're reading, they favor the same books. The two groups even share the exact same top three books: the book of Deuteronomy, Isaiah, and Psalm, right? So while the Dead Sea Scrolls have 24 books of Isaiah, some in complete and fragmentary form, making the second most extensive book from the Hebrew Bible, the New Testament quotes from the book of Isaiah 66 times, making it the second most quoted book. The Dead Sea Scrolls have revealed 27 books of Deuteronomy, the second most extensive book, while there are 54 quotes from this book in the New Testament, making it the third most quoted book. Finally, the book of Psalms has the most quotes amongst both the Dead Sea Scrolls and the New Testament. 34 forms of this book survive from the Dead Sea sect, while 79 quotes from the New Testament. So they're sharing exactly the same books and focus on them. I know you're not convinced yet. Let's keep going. Both those who wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls and the early Christians believe in believe in sharing all things in common. They both believe in sharing everything in common. Okay, so that means accordingly, they all have a single treasury. They all have common disbursements. Their clothes are held in common. Their food was held in common. They share the same roof, life, and board. And we see this with when it comes to both. We see them. We see this also, for example, remember. Actually, I'm going to read something here. Let's see. Here it is. They all have a single treasury and common disbursements. Oh, I just read that. Oh, here it is. Now Jesus, the New Testament. Now Jesus exhorted many of the Jews to give all they possessed to the poor and follow him. In fact, right, the infamous Judas was said to have been in charge of the common money box. We know from the book of Acts that they also shared things in common, everything in common. From both the Dead Sea sect and those of the Jesus movement were focused on eschatology. They lived in expectations of a fiery judgment for evildoers, as well as triumph and rewards of the force of light against these wicked forces of darkness. They both share this in common. Both the Dead Sea sect and the Jesus movement were waiting for the arrival of the Messiah. Both of them, right? In fact, moreover, right, both espoused earthly messianic beliefs. So this messianic figure will not arise out of the heavens, as in First Enoch, will not arise out of the sea, as in Fourth Ezra. He comes from amongst us, right? But the only difference is the community has two forms of Messiah. It has a priestly as well as a political Messiah, but there are lots of connections there, right? Um, Also, both the Messiahs and the Dead Sea Scrolls, as well as amongst Christians, focus on righteousness, purity, and opposition to wickedness. Both the Dead Sea sect and early Christians call themselves by the same name. I'm pausing here. They both call themselves the Way. I'm not kidding you. They call themselves the same. So the Dead Sea, they call themselves, they're the Way. Early Christians called themselves the Way. Oh, this is getting a little uncomfortable, isn't it? Both the Dead Sea sect and early Christians also call themselves the sons of light, as we see mentioned, of course, in Luke 16:8 and other places. Both the Dead Sea sect and early Christians saw themselves as representing a new covenant. And there's quite a bit here. I'm not going to read it all, right? Apparently, Jesus and the Dead Sea Scroll community believed that their actions constituted the realizations of this new covenant. In both communities, there was a time when this new covenant will be remembered. It must also be remembered that the figure of John the Baptist has many similarities with the Qumran community, including the fact that he declares that he is a voice that's calling in the wilderness to prepare the way of the Lord. This is what he says. He's a voice in the wilderness that is to prepare the way of the Lord. Well, that's interesting because the Qumran community, that's their phrase. That's their catchphrase. They use that over and over again in their writings, that they're the ones who are going to make the way through the desert. And they do so literally by going into the desert. It's like, oh, yeah. Okay. Anyway, so you have that. Also, there's another connection. And of course, John the Baptist does a lot of baptizing. The Qumran community, they believe in baptism. How? In fact, when it comes to baptism, first of all, for both John the Baptist and the Dead Sea Scroll community, the external ablution is useless according to both without repentance. Number two, this baptism is given to Jews, not to pagan converts, as it was for some other sects of Judaism at first. Changes below Apostle Paul, right? Okay. Number three, it is designed to set up a penitent nucleus in Israel for the coming of God. And fourth, similar to John the Baptist and, of course, the community of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the baptism is meant to be a preliminary to the dispensation of God's Spirit. Ooh, okay, so it fits in so many different ways. As far as ethics are concerned, the conduct of the followers of Jesus is close to expectations of conduct of those of the Qumran community. The community rule says the righteous teacher instructs they are to practice truth together with humility, charity, justice, loving kindness, modesty in all their ways. Community rule 5:3 through 4, which is the same ethos as the New Testament. Both the Dead Sea sect and early Christians had a sacred meal of bread and new wine. Not only did they have a sacred meal, both were done in hopes and looking forward to the arrival of the Messiah. And I just read that the quote from the Qumran community, from the Dead Sea sect earlier at the beginning of our talk. So it's like, oh yeah. So they're not only doing this. The only difference is is that they're also connecting to the body of Christ in Christianity. The same commemoration is there. Oh, there's so much. Okay, we're almost done here. Both the Qumran community and the followers of Jesus believe in the power of a distinct spirit that is considered the Holy Spirit, originally from God. They actually call it the Holy Spirit. Your Holy Spirit illuminates the dark places of the heart of your servant with light like the sun, says the Thanksgiving Psalms from the Qumran community. I look to the covenants made by men, worthless. Only your truth shines, and those who love it are wise and walk in the glow of your light. From darkness you raise hearts. Let light shine in your servant. Your light is everlasting. In fact, the Holy Spirit is mentioned as a Holy Spirit, in many cases seeming to be a separate hypostasis of God, working independently and anointing individuals independently, both in these scrolls and, of course, the Christian community. They both emphasize the importance of spiritual offerings rather than the literal offerings of the flesh. And of course, both the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Gospel of John apply the idea of living water for both salvation and connect to eschatology. Living water. Wow. Okay. There's even more. Okay. So there are a few differences. The big difference is that it appears that at a certain point, the Dead Sea sect became a little bit more warlike, a little more so less peaceful than the Essenes, as described by Philo, described by Josephus, and described by Pliny the Elder. But so who are they? And so it appears to be that because we actually understand now that the Essenes were not one solid sect, but there were many different forms of Essene beliefs, and there may be a connection to, that these early writers are connecting to a peaceful version of it, but that a more warlike, a more feisty version arose as a result of persecutions by the Romans during the first century. Does that make sense? And so different groups react in different ways, right? So what happened is that certain groups of these Essenes decided, well, we're not going to be peaceful. We're going to be more warlike. We're going to be advocating that we're going to fight against the Romans, right? But it still doesn't take out the idea that there were peaceful Essenes, because we also find represented in these scrolls more peaceful aspects as well. So it's a really complicated story. It's kind of like talking about Protestants. You talk about Protestants, there are many different denominations, right? But they're still Protestants. And the Essenes appeared to have been fragmented by the time we get to the first century CE, especially in regards to the Romans. And many will say that some of these Essenes, here we go, some of these Essenes became more zealous, and they ended up just south at Masada, where the Romans, of course, held them off until 73 CE after the Jewish revolt. Does that make sense? What about the others? Do we have a clue what happened to them? Well, it's fascinating because there's a reference in the New Testament, in Acts, right, where there's many who joined the Christian movement, and they're described as priests. Well, here's the fascinating part. They're not Sadducees. We know they wouldn't join. And Pharisees were priests. But the Essenes were. Got it? So the Essenes then joined the Christian movement. By deduction, there's only three major sects, the big ones of Judaism, and that's the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the Essenes. Those are the biggies. There's a few minor ones, right? but that has, the Herodians and so forth, Zealots, Zakari. Are you guys following this? So is there a connection? After giving you all this evidence, do you think there's possibly a connection between the Dead Sea Scrolls, the sect of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and early Christianity? Do you think it's just remotely possible? And I think the answer is a simple yeah. The real question is, we just don't know all the details yet, but it's enough to say that there is indeed a connection, and it's a little overwhelming. You guys got that? Did you guys enjoy the talk? That was it. You made it. You survived. It's 9:48. Okay, there we are. All right. So that was a lot of work. Any questions? I feel like an athlete. I'm like a towel around my neck. Questions? Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you. Thank you for I can't believe most of you stayed when I went 18 minutes over.
Where are all the scrolls located? I know that there's some at the Israel Museum in Jerusalem, but are there other locations as well?
Yeah, okay, they're located mostly at the Book of the Scroll, and I've been there, right? And the ones that you see on display are facsimiles on vegetable paper. The real ones are in a vault behind, and they're in terrible condition. So, but there are fragments here in the United States. People have purchased them. I think Azusa Pacific has a few, unless they gave them back. So there are fragments that come from the Jordanian side. So some of, because those Bedouin in Bethlehem, we talked about them, right? So a lot of them got distributed there, and so and gone through the labyrinth of antique dealers, and so Israel, of course, wants them all back, but they have arrived in that way. I'm not sure of other places. I'm sure there are other locations that came through that source. But yeah, Azusa, I guess it's pretty close to here, right? But I think they were revealed as fakes. I'm trying to think now. I think maybe they're, so you got to be careful, when you buy something. But look it up. Maybe I'll look it up too. Any other questions?
I had a question about when you talked about the scribes, how they had to say all the words aloud as they were transcribing them, and it was a terrible sin to make a mistake. Did that carry over into Christianity at all?
Did it carry over to Christianity? And the answer is, it did for a short period of time. In fact, the interesting part about this is that in ancient times, people believed that you just read out loud anyway. Reading was not a silent kind of reading that we have today. And that even continues into the Middle Ages. Just expected that when you read, you're going to be reading out loud, right? So, but the sacred aspect of it, yes, does carry into early Christian monasticism, and does continue for a very long time. That's why monks are known to always be muttering, because their scribes are, are writing, making copies of these works, and they're saying these words. And it does also help with their concentration. It probably makes them not fall asleep. Every now and then they get bored, and they find some other manuscript to, hey, I'm tired of writing copy of the Bible. Let's use this other manuscript. They'll find some kind of pagan writing or something that's, really steamy. They're like, well, we're going to do this because we're going to copy this because we want to make sure we know what we're against. Wink, wink. And it's like, whoa, okay. It's break time for monks. Good question.
Thank you.
That's right. Any other questions?
So I just want to be clear on who the Essenes and the Christians, the early Christians, they had things in common. The Essenes were more like early Christians who did not accept Jesus as the Messiah.
Right.
So when the two sects intermingled, they had all this in common, and so did the Christians bring in Jesus, or did they discard Jesus and become Essenes?
Okay, great question, and I love it so much. Okay, so I'll go ahead and break this down if my dog lets me. Uh, it's like apparently Blueberry has an answer, and I don't know what the answer is for Blueberry. Okay, so what happens is this: is that you have amongst those of the Dead Sea sect, you have this person who is the righteous teacher,
Right.
and this righteous teacher opens up the way for the messiahs to come about. He is the
Messiahs is
the
multiple.
messiahs as in two, right? You have in some cases some of the scrolls have one messiah, some have the other, but the majority is that there's two messiahs. There's one that is a political messiah, and there's one that is a spiritual messiah.
Okay.
The priesthood. So you have a political and eschatological priesthood. There are two separate ones. One is for the political messiah is for the immediate here and now, and the eschatological priesthood messiah is for the end of time. It's great battle between the forces of light and darkness. This is the Dead Sea sect, right? So you got
Right.
two messiahs, right? Still have a righteous teacher who's making the way for, it will be at, in fact, this great feast at the end of all time in heaven. The righteous teacher will be there with God, and I gotta love it. You gotta love this. The Dead Sea sect even tells you who's going to be sitting at the various chairs around the table. Yeah, like a seating chart. Anyway, I want to be specific. He's the one who leads the way. But there are two messiahs. I'll say it again: two messiahs. You have one that's for the immediate here and now, which is the Davidic Messiah. This is the political Messiah, and this is the one that's going to fight against the Romans. He is the anointed one that's going to fight against the Hitler. The priestly Messiah is the one that's going to come at the very end of time, lead the battle between the forces of light and the forces of darkness against Belial. Right? You got that right so far? Okay. Now, Jesus. Okay. Now, with Jesus, you have in him. They believe that he is going to be a political messiah, right? So when James and John, they're going up to Jerusalem, they're kind of fighting over who's going to be on the right-hand side of Jesus, and we're going to beat the Romans, right? And so their perspective is that he is, and it's actually mentioned in the New Testament, he is the Davidic Messiah, as we know from Matthew and other. Right? He is the Davidic Messiah. He's the one for here and now. Right? And then he gets crucified. And then, of course, according to Christian belief, he's resurrected. Now they're going, or maybe he's the priestly Messiah, the eschatological Messiah after all. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay, so he has within him, through the story of his life, both aspects. And so what will happen is the Essene idea of the two messiahs will be blended in one within Christianity, as one and the same Messiah, who is within his lifetime, he is a political Messiah, and then after the crucifixion, because his kingdom is not here, it's of heaven, right? Then it becomes the idea that he is the messianic Messiah connected with the end of times, and you have that. And then, of course, the interesting part about this, because I want to make things really complicated, is that I think that a lot of people thought that he was the righteous teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Right? He's like the man righteous teacher. Who believed this? The Ebionites and various Jewish Christians, they had him as the righteous teacher. This is making sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he has this human side. And so he has all these aspects rolled into one. So yeah, if you are, what happens is that you figure out that this kind of idea would appeal to those who are of the Dead Sea sect, would it not? It's like, well, wait a minute, we already believe that there's one who's making the way, who then, of course, becomes John the Baptist, right? So they'll go, hey, maybe the righteous teacher is John the Baptist, Others will say, maybe the righteous teacher is James the Righteous. And you'll see that also within a group known as the Ebionites. This is helpful, right? So there's one who leads the way. And then Jesus, who at first may have been thought as the righteous teacher, who came back. Remember, the righteous teacher, according to the Dead Sea sect, will come back again. They all believe that. So he does come again. They'll believe that, well, I guess he's not the righteous teacher. Now it's either John the Baptist or it's going to be it's James the Righteous. Now it's Jesus. He's got to be the Messiah for us. And this is where those who are from the sect will go, okay, we believe, and we're entering into it because, hey, we all have a sacred meal. We don't have to change that. We all share things in common. We don't have to change that. In many cases, we find in some places have 10 to 12 disciples. Oh, we got that one now. We got baptism. We got the Holy Spirit. Okay, we're in. It's not that big a leap to get to this.
No, I can totally see that. Yeah,
it's very close. So when I see people like Mark goes, there's no connection. I'm going, are you insane? What's wrong with you? It's like, there's no connection whatsoever just because it happened in the exact same geographical area. There's no, you can't do that. And Raymond Brown, when he goes into the idea that it's indirect, I don't know. I think it's got to be more direct than that. But I'm never with Eisman. I will never be with Eisman on this.
No, he's ignoring way too much.
Yeah, and he was upset by that, and I apologize if he's listening. So we had an interesting situation. So I taught at Cal State Long Beach, and actually, because for a temporary period of time he was not teaching there, I took over his classes, and I taught his courses at Cal State Long Beach on historical Jesus. And early Christianity. So I taught those at Cal State Long Beach. And then I went over to Cal State Fullerton. And we had this great symposium in 2011. And I invited all these great Dead Sea Scroll scholars, and I didn't invite him. It wasn't intentional. And he was very upset. And somebody had a cell phone, and they handed the cell phone, and he basically just was very angry. But I'm thinking to myself, this was an event that would not fit where he was going. Listen, the thing is that these scholars cannot. I'm an archaeologist. I just can't do it. My heart is not there. It can't be the 1st century CE. It can't be, because the Dead Sea Scrolls date earlier. And you can't change the dates to make them later, no matter how much you try. I mean, the great Isaiah scroll, 4 times carbon dating, and paleography, looking at the letters, sure, it can be off by a few decades, but it can't be off by 100 years or more. It's not possible. And so we're getting into something that's kind of absurd. And I did like the fact that maybe the context goes into the 1st century BCE, but then he goes in this idea where all these figures are all mythological, and it's like, then we get into something really strange, and it's not really good history. It doesn't use the historical methodology. Does that help? In a way that I feel comfortable with. So, and the thing is, I think that he would have been disruptive to those scholars. So, because he's known to be disruptive. Which is good when it came to making sure the Dead Sea Scrolls continually be being published, but not good when it comes to a forum, academic forum. Again, I apologize to you, Eisman. Sorry. I love you, but you're a nice guy at times, but I can't go with it. So, my official. I don't mind having the tape. Okay. Any other questions? Because he knows all this. I mean, he lived. Any other questions? Ask any questions, and it will be there. Anything you want to know about the Dead Sea Scrolls? In fact, I may be open to answering anything about Dead Sea Squirrels. we can do that. We can do that too. But don't think that I think that will be a not a rabbit hole, but a squirrel hole. So you can mute me, you know that, right?
I'm tempted, tell you what, I am.
Okay, so I guess we're okay.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you all for being here. Great seeing you, Steve. Hope you enjoyed it.
Thanks, Dr. Jim.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, and I hope you come back next time. I'm talking about ancient Jewish magic, as well as ancient. Actually, doing ancient Jewish and medieval magic. So that should be fascinating. So
Very good. As schedules will allow. As schedule
Yeah.
allows, I'll try to join you again.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank
All
you.
right, I
Have a
guess
good
we're
night.
off.